I still remember that afternoon when everything I believed about family shattered. The lawyer's office smelled of polished wood and old paper. My hands were cold, my pulse too loud. I had come to hear my late father's will. I expected formality, a list of assets, maybe a few emotional words. Instead, I found myself sitting across from faces I barely recognized anymore. My own relatives, smiling as if victory had already been declared. When the lawyer cleared his throat, silence filled the room like fog. He began reading. To my eldest child, I leave the house and all associated property rights. That was not me. Another name followed. Then another. Each word cut deeper until I realized my name was missing. At first, I thought it was a clerical mistake. My father was meticulous. He would never forget me. I glanced toward my brother. He avoided my eyes. My aunt's lips twitched into a smirk she tried to hide behind a tissue. Something inside me sank. When I finally spoke, my voice cracked. Is that all? The lawyer hesitated, glancing at the paper again. Yes. According to this document, that is the complete distribution. Every eye turned to me. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. It was the silence of guilt pretending to be innocence. My mother's gaze trembled for a second, but she looked away quickly, as if afraid I might see what she had done. That was the first moment I understood. This was planned. Every move, every conversation in the past year, every subtle exclusion, it had all led to this room. They had cut me out completely. My father's business, gone. The house I grew up in, theirs. The land that carried generations of our name, signed away. I had been erased, quietly, efficiently, as if my existence was a problem solved. I stood up. The lawyer's voice followed me. There is always an option to contest the will. My brother scoffed. Contest what? You have nothing. That sentence stayed with me for weeks. You have nothing. But they were wrong. I still had the truth. And I still had time. In the following days, I replayed every recent memory. Small things that made no sense before now began to align like pieces of a cruel puzzle. My father's sudden change of tone months before his death. The family meetings I had not been invited to. The way my mother's handwriting appeared on legal papers, even though she claimed ignorance. It was as if a curtain had fallen, revealing a stage where I had been the fool in someone else's play. The first twist came when I visited my father's old accountant, pretending to just understand things better. He was nervous, too nervous. His eyes flickered between the drawer and me. I asked a simple question. When did my father sign his final will? He hesitated. A few weeks before he passed. But I remembered. My father was in the hospital then. He could barely hold a pen. That night, I could not sleep. My thoughts raced between grief and fury. If they had forged his signature, this was more than betrayal. It was a crime. Yet I had no proof, no allies, and no resources. They had not only taken my inheritance, they had taken my stability, too. Still, anger has a strange way of giving clarity. I promised myself that if they wanted war, I would give them one. But I would not shout. I would not beg. I would use their own greed against them. And so began my quiet revenge. I started by pretending to accept defeat. I congratulated them on their victory, even thanked them for teaching me about trust. My brother believed it. My aunt laughed behind my back. But my mother, she hesitated every time I smiled. Maybe part of her remembered the child she once loved. Or maybe she just feared exposure. In secret, I contacted the lawyer again. Not the one who handled the will, but another who had once worked with my father years ago. He remembered me. He also remembered something strange. My last meeting with your father, he mentioned updating his documents again. Said he wanted things to be fair. Fair. The word burned like light through fog. Where was that updated will? Why was it never mentioned? I asked the lawyer if he had a copy. He shook his head, but said something that made my pulse quicken. I sent the draft to him by courier. He said your brother would handle the pickup. That was the moment I knew. My family had done more than scheme. They had interfered with my father's final wishes. And if that draft still existed, it could destroy them. As I walked out of that office, rain began to fall. It felt like the city itself was whispering the same word over and over. Proof. The storm outside mirrored the one inside me. They thought they had buried me, but they had only planted me deeper. I would grow through their lies, and when I rose, they would not recognize the person standing before them. This was no longer about money. It was about justice. Long before the betrayal became visible, The signs were there. Quiet. Almost polite. Like faint cracks on a mirror that everyone pretended not to see. It started after my father's first heart attack. He survived, but something in him changed. He became cautious, withdrawn, often locked in his study for hours. I assumed it was fear of death or the weight of business responsibilities. I did not realize that behind those closed doors, new alliances were being formed, not with friends or partners, but within my own bloodline. My brother moved in with our parents soon after. He said it was to help. That word still makes me flinch. Help. Every time someone uses it now, I hear its opposite, control. At first, I was relieved. Someone was there to look after them while I worked. I called every night, sent money whenever needed, but soon, my calls went unanswered. I was told they were resting, busy, or simply not home. Slowly, I was being erased, gently, politely, deliberately. Months later, when I visited, my father barely recognized me at the gate. His eyes were tired, and my brother's shadow loomed behind him like a guard. There was tension in the air, unspoken but heavy. Inside the house, everything felt wrong. My childhood photos were missing from the walls. My old room had been turned into storage. And in the living room, my father's business files were spread across the table, files my brother had no right to touch. I asked my father if he was feeling better. He nodded but did not meet my eyes. My mother avoided the room altogether. The silence between us was louder than thunder. That evening, my brother took me aside. His tone was calm, almost friendly. "You have your life now," he said. "You should focus on that. We'll handle things here." "We?" I asked. "Me and Mom," he replied, as if that settled everything. I remember feeling something cold crawl up my spine. It was not anger, not yet. It was disbelief. The same disbelief you feel when someone smiles while twisting a knife. From that day, I noticed patterns. My father's trusted accountant stopped answering my messages. The lawyer who had managed his estate for years suddenly resigned. Even the domestic staff changed. People I had known for decades replaced by strangers who avoided eye contact. It was as if an entire world was being rebuilt without me. Then came the letter, a formal notice stating that all family business matters would henceforth be handled solely by my brother. I called my father in panic, but the number had been changed. My messages to my mother were left unread. I told myself it was temporary. Families fight. They make mistakes. They reconcile. I believed that until the day I arrived unannounced and saw my father arguing with my brother. I hid behind the half-open door, my breath shallow. "You promised this would stay between us," my father said, voice trembling. My brother's reply was sharp. "You should rest. I am only protecting what is mine." "What is yours?" my father repeated softly, disbelief breaking his voice. "You think money can buy loyalty?" My brother laughed. "It bought yours, didn't it?" That sentence cut through the air like a blade. I wanted to storm in, but something stopped me. Fear, maybe, or shock. I realized that whatever this was, it was deeper than greed. It was corruption of the heart. Later that night, I confronted my brother. He denied everything. He said I was overreacting, imagining things. He even offered me money to take some time off. That was the moment I knew he no longer saw me as family. I was a problem to be managed. When my father passed away months later, I received the news through a distant relative, not from my own mother. No one had called. No one had told me about the funeral until it was over. I arrived at an empty house, half the furniture gone, the rest covered in dust sheets. Grief and fury fought inside me, but guilt won. I blamed myself for not being there, for trusting too easily. I convinced myself that maybe they were right. Maybe I had drifted away. Maybe I deserved the distance. But the illusion shattered when I met the hospital nurse who had been with my father in his final week. She told me something that rewrote everything I thought I knew. "Your father kept asking for you," she said quietly. "He said he needed to fix something before it was too late." I froze. "Did he say what it was?" She hesitated. "He asked for his briefcase. The one with the red tag. He said only you would understand what was inside." That single sentence became the key to everything. The briefcase. I had seen it before. Heavy, locked, always near his desk. When I returned to the house, it was gone. I searched everywhere, drawers, cupboards, the basement, nothing. My brother claimed he had never seen it. My mother stayed silent. But there was a look in her eyes, guilt mixed with fear, that told me she was lying. Days later, I received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. "You are looking for something that belonged to your father," he said. "Who is this?" "I was his lawyer once," the man replied. "And I think you should come see me before your brother does." That was how it truly began, not the betrayal, but my awakening. For the first time in months, I felt something other than grief. It was focus, cold, sharp, precise. I realized that if my family had orchestrated this, then they must have left traces. People like them always do. They believe they are clever because they think no one is watching. But I was watching now. The next morning, I took a bus across the city to meet the man who would change everything. The lawyer who still believed my father had tried to make things right before his death. As the bus rattled through the rain, I looked out the window and saw my reflection staring back. My face looked different, not broken anymore, but determined. Something inside me had shifted. They thought I was out of the picture. They thought they had silenced me, but they had only made me dangerous. When I walked into the lawyer's office that morning, I did not yet understand how deep the manipulation had gone. The office was small, barely holding the weight of its own secrets. A man in his 60s sat behind the desk, his glasses low on his nose, papers spread like a battlefield between truth and deceit. He looked up as I entered. "You look just like him," he said quietly. "My father." He nodded. "He trusted me once. Before your brother replaced everything loyal with everything profitable." That sentence lingered in the air. I sat down, my heartbeat quickening. He slid a brown envelope across the table. "Your father sent this to my office 2 days before he was hospitalized. He said if anything happened to him, I was to keep it safe." My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside were handwritten notes, some pages torn from journals, and a few legal drafts marked not final. At the bottom of the pile was a half-burned photograph. My father, my mother, my brother, and me. My father's arm rested around my shoulders, and on the back of the photo were 3 words written in his pen: "Trust no one." The lawyer sighed. He wanted to change his will. He felt something was wrong. He said his signature was being used without his consent. I froze. "Used? For what?" "For property transfers," he said. "Documents that moved assets into your brother's control." My head began to spin. The betrayal I had sensed was not emotional. It was deliberate, calculated, and executed with precision. They had not just turned against me. They had rewritten the truth. The lawyer leaned closer. He also mentioned a recording. He said he kept proof. "Do you know anything about that?" I shook my head. "If you find it," he continued, "do not confront them directly. They will not hesitate to destroy you to protect themselves." That warning stayed with me. Over the next few weeks, I played a role I never wanted, the quiet one. I answered calls from my mother, pretended to forgive, and even visited the house again. Every smile I gave was a disguise. I watched how they interacted, the rehearsed phrases, the synchronized lies. They had practiced this. My mother often said, "We only did what your father wanted." Her tone was rehearsed, her eyes flickering to my brother for reassurance. I realized she was afraid, not of me, but of him. He had taken control of everything. He paid the bills, managed the staff, handled the accounts. Even my mother's medication was under his supervision. I once saw her reach for a bottle, and his hand stopped her midair. "You already took one," he said. His voice was calm, but she recoiled like a child. It dawned on me that manipulation was not just aimed at me. It was consuming her too. Late one night, I stayed outside their gate, watching the lights go off room by room. Then, around midnight, I saw it, a flicker of light from my father's old study. The same study that had been locked since his death. My brother was inside. I moved closer, my footsteps silent. Through the glass, I saw him burning papers. My father's handwriting curled into ash before disappearing into smoke. That was the moment the truth hardened inside me. This was not a family matter anymore. This was a crime. I needed proof, not emotions, not memories, but evidence. The next morning, I went back to the lawyer and told him what I saw. He advised me to stay patient. "You cannot fight them with feelings," he said. "You need the law on your side. Gather what they cannot deny." I started digging. Slowly, quietly, methodically. The old accountant, the one who had been replaced, agreed to meet me after hours. He looked exhausted, fearful. "I cannot talk long," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "But yes, your father's signature was forged. I warned your brother it was illegal, and the next day, I was fired. I recorded everything. Every confession, Every document, every misplaced ledger became part of my invisible case. But the deeper I dug, the more dangerous it became. Someone began following me. A car parked near my apartment every night, headlights off. My messages to friends started disappearing before they read them. I was being watched. The realization terrified me, but it also sharpened me. If they wanted to intimidate me, they had chosen the wrong tactic. Fear was no longer my weakness. It was my weapon. It kept me alert, strategic, and unpredictable. One evening, I received a message from my mother. Please stop this. You will only make it worse. For the first time, I saw the guilt break through her fear. I called her, and she answered in a whisper. They said you were planning to destroy the family, she said, trembling. They destroyed it themselves, I replied. I am only showing the truth. She began crying softly. You do not understand. There is more to this than money. What then? They made a deal, she said, voice shaking. A deal with someone dangerous. If this goes public, he will come for all of us. The line went dead. That night, I could not sleep. A deal? Who was he? And why was my father trying to change the will right before his death? I stared at the half-burned photograph again, tracing my father's handwriting. Trust no one. It felt less like advice and more like a prophecy. Days passed, and the pressure grew heavier. My brother began calling me unexpectedly, pretending to reconcile. His voice was smooth, but every word felt rehearsed. You should let go, he said. We can share something later. Just stay quiet. Why now? I asked. He hesitated. Because things are getting complicated. That hesitation was my confirmation. Something was unraveling behind the scenes, and they were trying to control it before it collapsed. I did not reply. I just said, I already know more than you think. For the first time, he sounded nervous. The next day, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No sender, no address. Inside was a USB drive. A note was attached. He recorded everything. Do not trust anyone near the house. My heartbeat stopped for a moment. It was him. My father. The recording existed. But the question was, who sent it? As I stared at that tiny piece of plastic, a strange calm washed over me. The manipulation, the lies, the gaslighting, it all led to this. I finally had something that could turn their entire world upside down. But I also knew one thing. Once I played this card, there would be no going back. I did not plug the drive into my own laptop. I took a cheap secondhand one from a pawn shop and wiped it twice. I sat near a window where the camera could see me and where any surprise visitor would have to cross an open space to reach me. I wanted witnesses even if they never knew me. Fear made me careful. Anger made me patient. The folder on the drive held 4 audio files, 1 video, and a scan draft. The dates ran across the last month of my father's life. I opened the first audio file with the volume low. I heard my father's breath, then his voice, thin but steady. He stated the time, the place, and the reason for the recording. He said he would not let his hand be guided again. He said his signature had been used without him. He named my brother. He named my mother. He named a man I did not know. That stranger's name repeated across the files. My father described him as the one who promised liquidity if assets moved quickly. The arrangement would look lawful at a glance. A few keystrokes, a few stamps, a few signatures prepared in advance. The stranger would receive a share. My brother would receive the rest. My mother would receive safety, or at least the illusion of it. The second file cut deeper. My father spoke about a courier he never met. He said the draft he dictated to his old lawyer had not returned to him. He said his hand shook when he tried to sign the copy my brother pushed in front of him. He refused. He said he would record his refusal because paper could vanish and ink could be replaced. A voice in the background insisted that he should rest, that everything had been settled. The voice sounded like my brother. The tone sounded like a warning. I paused the file and checked the windows again. The street looked ordinary. A vendor called out prices. A child ran behind a stray dog. Normal life continued as if mine had not split open. I went back to the drive. The video had poor light, but clear sound. The frame showed only the edge of a hospital bed and the corner of a clipboard. A nurse spoke softly, asking my father to confirm his name and the date. He did. Then he said he would hand the recording to me if he could. He said the red tag briefcase held notes, the draft, and a USB. He repeated that he trusted me. He looked toward someone off camera and said, "Do not take this from me." The clip ended there. A shadow crossed the lens at the last second. The shape looked like a hand. The scanned draft waited at the bottom of the folder. It was a complete will, signed but not witnessed. The last page carried a long line where his name should have been. The stroke started strong and broke off halfway. Under it, in my father's handwriting, appeared one sentence. "I cannot sign this under pressure." In the margin, another hand had written, "We will finish tomorrow." I knew that hand. I grew up watching it write shopping lists and birthday notes. It was my mother's. My chest felt hollow. Grief rose like a wave and then steadied. There it was. Proof of pressure. Proof of interference. Proof that he tried to stop it. The third audio file brought a new tremor. My father described a meeting in his study where the stranger demanded collateral. The house and the land had value, but the business carried the real weight. If the transfers faced delay, the stranger wanted guarantees. My father refused again. The recording caught the scrape of a chair and a thud. A muttered insult came through the speaker, then a door. He coughed. He said he would call the old lawyer in the morning. He said my name and told me to stay away from night visits. He said he was being watched. The fourth file was short. He asked whoever found the drive to send copies to the court if he died. He gave the name of a clerk he trusted. He said that clerk would log the material without my brother's knowledge. He ended with a sentence that still shakes me when I think about it. Blood is not a reason to obey. I copied everything twice and hid the second copy in a place I would not revisit. Then I took the pawn shop laptop to a friend who ran a repair stall and asked him to keep it for a week as if it belonged to someone else. I walked away and changed my route 3 times before going home. On the bus, I looked at every face and searched for intent. Paranoia can make a mind invent enemies, but mine did not need to invent anything. I had a new name now, the man behind my brother, and that name led to records that did not sleep. I went to the registry the next day. I asked for public filings tied to that name. I did not show surprise when the clerk listed 6 shell firms formed in the last year. 3 of them had ties to a notary who had processed the property transfers in my family's name. One had a silent partner who looked suspiciously like my aunt's oldest friend. I ordered certified copies and left. The story was no longer a private wound. It was a pattern that reached beyond our gate. That night, my mother called. Her voice sounded raw, as if sleep refused to visit her. She asked me if I had spoken to anyone. I told her I was trying to understand what Father wanted. She said Father wanted peace. I asked her if peace meant silence. She went quiet for a long time. Then she whispered that the stranger would not let us go even if we gave up the estate. She said a promise had been made. She said my brother had used the business to secure a short-term loan with predatory terms. She said the stranger held a clause that would devour everything if a single payment failed. I asked her who signed. She started to cry. Then the line cut. I did not call back. I saved her number under a new name and turned off my phone. The next step needed the law, not just outrage. I took the recordings and the draft to the old lawyer. He listened without interrupting. He pressed pause, only to check the timestamps. He wrote down the notary's name and the shell firms. He looked older when he put down his pen. He told me we needed 2 paths running at once. One path would seek an injunction to stop any further transfer or encumbrance. The other would seek to invalidate the will and question the earlier transfers on grounds of fraud and undue influence. Both paths needed speed. Both paths needed evidence that could stand without me if I vanished. The word vanished hung in the air between us like a thin wire. He saw it land, and he did not dismiss it. He told me to tell someone I trust where the files sit. I told him there was no one. He said I should create a someone. I understood. I wrote a letter and sealed it with the clerk's name on the front. News moved faster than paper. By evening, my brother called with a new tone. He said we should talk like adults. He said the past had many versions. He said the hospital made Father confused. He implied that I was using grief for profit. He tried to shame me back into silence. I told him I had recordings. He stopped breathing for a moment. He asked me what I wanted. I said I wanted the truth to be on record. I said I wanted the transfers frozen. I said I wanted the draft acknowledged. He swore that I was about to burn the family. I said the family had been burned already. He hung up. The next morning the threat took shape. A message slid under my door. It carried no sender and no signature. It said, "Stop, or you will regret what you make public." The paper smelled like smoke. The edge had a small gray smear, as if someone had pressed a cigarette to the corner and then changed their mind. I took the note to the lawyer and to the police. The officer at the desk wrote a report as if nothing would ever come of it. I did not argue. Reports turn into timestamps. Timestamps turn into shields. The injunction hearing date came in faster than I expected. We filed the recordings under seal. We listed the notary and the shell firms. We asked the court to pause every pending action tied to my father's estate. We attached the draft with the line and the sentence in his hand. We attached an affidavit from the nurse who had confirmed the video date. The clerk logged the file number and handed me a thin slip of paper that felt heavier than metal. On my way out of the courthouse, I saw a man I did not know leaning against a pillar. He watched me with the calm of someone who believed the end had already been written. He had the stranger's name. He had my brother's eyes. He smiled and tapped his phone. My phone buzzed at the same time, even though I had changed the number. A new message appeared from an unknown contact. It contained a single image. The red tag briefcase sat open on a table. Inside lay ash. My hands did not shake. I looked up at the man and held his gaze. He wanted fear. I gave him silence. I knew something he did not know. The copy he thought he had destroyed was not the only copy. The copy he wanted to scare me with was not the one that would land on the judge's desk at dawn. I walked past him without turning my head. I took 3 steps, then 4, and then a second buzz reached my pocket. The next message did not hold a threat. It held a confession typed in a rush. It came from a number saved long ago as home. It said, "I sent you the drive. I cannot carry this any longer." I stopped at the curb. Traffic roared and then faded. The world seemed to tilt. The sender had used no name, but I knew who had written it. The hand that fed me. The hand that wrote in the margin. The hand that might testify if fear loosened its grip long enough to tell the truth. I typed one sentence back. "Meet me tomorrow where Father used to sit alone." I added the time. I sent it. Then I turned the phone off and kept walking, counting the streetlights like a prayer. The city did not change, but something in me did. I had been begging for a witness. Now I had one, and that witness might either save me or bury me. At dawn, the court would open the sealed envelope. By noon, the stranger would know I had moved the fight into a place he could not burn. Before sunset, I would face the person who had chosen between blood and truth and decided to pick both. The day had not started yet, and already I could feel the floor shift under all of us. The cafe stood at the edge of the old park where my father used to sit with his tea and newspapers. The benches were still painted the same faded green, but everything else had aged. The air smelled of dust and rain. I arrived before sunrise. My mother arrived 20 minutes later, wearing a scarf pulled tight around her face. She looked smaller than I remembered. She sat without a word. Her hands trembled on the table. "I thought you would not come," I said. "I almost didn't." "Then why did you?" "Because he told me to." For a moment I thought she meant my brother, but she looked at the sky and whispered, "Your father." Silence spread between us. I could hear the slow sweep of the street cleaner's broom somewhere nearby. She finally spoke again, voice flat, almost drained. "He knew he would not make it. He begged me to protect you. I thought I was doing that when I agreed to their plan." "You call forging documents protection?" Tears rolled down her face. "He threatened to ruin us." "The stranger. He said if we did not sign, he would drag the business through court and take everything. Your father's debts, the taxes, the workers' pensions, all of it would vanish." I panicked. "Your brother said he could fix it. He said it was only temporary. Then he made me sign." I leaned forward. "Where is that man now?" She swallowed hard. "Watching your brother. Waiting for his money. And now, because of what you filed, he thinks I spoke to someone." She opened her purse and slid a folded paper toward me. "This is his card. Do not call him. Just know his name." The name printed on it matched the one from the recordings. The address led to an office complex known for shell companies and quiet deals. "I cannot protect both of you," she said. "If you keep this case alive, he will come after you. If you stop, your father's name dies in a lie. I do not know which is worse." I stared at her, trying to find the mother who used to sing while cooking, the one who told me stories about loyalty. All I saw was a frightened woman crushed under choices she could not undo. "You already picked your side?" I said softly. She shook her head. "I picked survival. And I picked truth." She flinched as if the word itself burned. Then she stood, left the card on the table, and walked away without looking back. The next few days blurred into movement. The injunction had triggered noise. Reporters started sniffing around the case. The court clerk told me that sealed files rarely stayed secret when they touched property and power. I was prepared for whispers, but not for the sudden swarm of messages from distant cousins and old family friends asking if the rumors were true. My brother called again, furious. "You embarrassed us," he shouted. "Do you know what you have done?" "Yes," I said. "I have told the truth." "You think the law cares about your truth? You think father's little recordings matter? You will lose, and when you do, I will make sure you regret it." He hung up before I could answer. Later that night, the old lawyer sent me a message. They filed a counterclaim. Fraud accusation. They claim you manipulated the documents. I stared at the screen. The irony almost made me laugh. They had stolen everything, and now they were calling me the thief. The hearing arrived faster than my nerves could prepare. The courtroom smelled of cold marble and coffee. My brother's lawyer, a tall man with a calm face and eyes like glass, greeted me with polite contempt. "This will not take long," he said as we passed each other. The judge entered, a woman with an expression that revealed nothing. The case began. My brother's lawyer spoke first, weaving a tale of a confused parent, a bitter child, and fabricated evidence. He painted me as unstable, desperate for attention, twisting grief into greed. My brother sat beside him, face stoic, hands clasped like a saint. Then it was my turn. My lawyer played the recordings. The courtroom filled with my father's voice, weary, broken, but unmistakable. The words hung in the air. "I cannot sign this under pressure." The silence that followed felt like a held breath. The opposing lawyer tried to object, claiming fabrication. The judge overruled. Then the video played, the nurse confirming the date, the brief moment of my father looking directly at the camera. When it ended, my brother's face had lost its stillness. His hand tapped the table nervously, but the blow came from somewhere unexpected. The judge asked my mother to testify. She had been subpoenaed, and though she tried to avoid it, she appeared. She looked at me only once, then faced the judge. "Did your husband ever express fear that his documents were being changed without consent?" "Yes." "Did he sign the final will willingly?" Her lips quivered. "No, who asked him to?" She hesitated for what felt like hours. "My son." Gasps echoed through the room. My brother slammed his hand on the table. "She's lying," he shouted, but the damage was done. The judge called for order. The hearing was adjourned until the following week. As I left the courtroom, reporters rushed forward with cameras. I said nothing. The flash of lights followed me to the street. That evening, I found my apartment door slightly open. Inside, drawers were overturned, papers scattered. Only one thing was missing, the pawnshop laptop. I called the police, filed another report, and then called the lawyer. He sighed. "They are desperate now. That means we are close." I sat in the dark after hanging up, staring at the empty desk. The fear that once made me hide now felt different. It no longer controlled me. It warned me. Before dawn, I went to the court clerk and handed him another USB. "A backup," I said. "Different drive, same contents." He logged it with a quiet nod. The next hearing brought no mercy. The stranger finally appeared, sitting at the back of the courtroom in a gray suit. He did not speak, he only watched. His presence felt like a weight pressing on everyone's chest. My brother's lawyer presented new documents claiming the recordings were doctored, but when the judge examined the metadata, the timestamps aligned perfectly with hospital records. The lie cracked under its own precision. The judge ordered a forensic review and a temporary freeze on all estate transfers. My brother's face went pale. The stranger stood, whispered something to him, and left before anyone could stop him. As the gavel struck, the judge looked directly at me. "Until verification is complete, you hold temporary guardianship of the disputed estate." The sound of that sentence filled my chest like air after drowning. It was not victory yet, but it was the first breath of freedom. I walked out into the sunlight, trembling. People passed me on the street without knowing that my entire life had just shifted. The fight was far from over. The stranger still had his hold, and my brother still had desperation. But for the first time since my father's death, the truth had a voice. That night, I returned to the park. The bench was empty. I sat where my father used to sit and watched the city lights flicker. Somewhere between the noise and the quiet, I whispered a promise. They thought they could erase me, but I will make sure your name is never buried. The wind moved through the trees like an answer. And for the first time in years, I felt peace begin to replace anger. Not because the war was over, but because I finally knew how to fight it. The courthouse smelled different that morning. It carried a mix of rain and unease, the kind that sits heavy before something irreversible happens. Everyone seemed to sense it, the clerks whispering in corners, the lawyers checking their watches, even the guard at the door watching every face twice. I sat quietly beside my lawyer, hands folded, eyes fixed on the polished floor. Across the aisle, my brother leaned close to his attorney, whispering with the forced calm of a man who had not slept. My mother was absent. I could not tell if that was mercy or betrayal. The judge entered without ceremony. "The forensic report is complete," she said. "We will review the findings in open court." Those words shifted the air. The clerk handed her a file. The pages turned slowly, like the ticking of a clock. "The signature on the contested will," the judge began, "shows mechanical repetition inconsistent with a natural hand movement. Microscopic analysis reveals overlapping ink impressions typical of trace signatures. The pen pressure patterns do not match earlier verified samples from the deceased." Every sentence struck like a hammer. The room was silent except for the faint scratching of pens taking notes. "In simpler terms," she continued, "this document was forged." My brother's lawyer stood immediately. "Your Honor, that cannot be correct. There must be contamination." "Sit down, counsel," the judge said sharply. "The evidence is clear. The signature was not genuine." My brother turned toward me, face pale, lips trembling. For the first time since this began, he looked small. The judge set the report aside. "We will now determine intent. Who created or instructed this forgery will decide whether we proceed with criminal charges." That was when the stranger entered. Late, deliberate, wearing the same gray suit as before. He walked straight to the front row and sat behind my brother. No greeting, no acknowledgement, just presence, the kind that absorbs oxygen. The judge noticed. "Identify yourself." He rose calmly. "I am legal counsel for a private investment firm with financial interest in the estate." "What firm?" "Argus Capital," he said, voice steady. "We extended credit to the deceased company under contractual obligation." The judge's gaze sharpened. "You are not listed as a creditor in the official filings." "That may be an oversight." The room stirred. My lawyer leaned toward me and whispered, "He just admitted involvement." The judge motioned to the bailiff. "You will remain seated. Any interference, and you will be removed." The stranger nodded once, smiling faintly, as if this were theater. My lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we have reason to believe this man participated in coercing the deceased into altering his will and transferring property through fraudulent means." The judge gestured for him to continue. He presented the shell company records, each tied back to Argus Capital through minor partners. He showed the timestamps from the recordings where my father mentioned the man's name. The courtroom turned into a web of documents and voices, every thread connecting greed to deception. The stranger's calm never cracked, but his eyes hardened. When he finally spoke, his voice dropped low. "Do you have proof that I personally touched a single document?" My lawyer replied, "We have proof that without you, those documents would not exist." The judge ordered a recess for review. Everyone stood, the sound of shoes echoing across marble. My brother avoided my gaze, but his hands told the story, trembling, restless, trapped. Outside the courtroom, the hallway buzzed with murmurs. Reporters hovered near the steps, sensing blood in the water. My lawyer and I stepped into a small side room to breathe. "He is going to push for settlement," my lawyer said. "He will claim ignorance, offer money, and walk away clean if you agree. And if I do not, then we go for full prosecution. But you must understand, men like him do not lose quietly." I stared at the wall. "Neither do I." The afternoon session began with tension sharp enough to cut. The judge returned holding new documents. During recess, this court received an affidavit from the hospital nurse confirming that Mr. She named my father. "Expressed fear of a man matching your description, sir." She looked at the stranger. "Would you like to comment?" He smiled again. "People say many things when they are ill." She leaned forward. "And some of them die before they can say them again." The silence after that sentence was heavy. Then came the twist I did not expect. My mother entered. She walked slowly, escorted by a bailiff. Her face looked drained, but her eyes were clear. The judge asked if she wished to testify voluntarily. She nodded. She swore the oath and stood trembling before the microphone. "The man sitting there," she said, pointing toward the stranger, "came to our house 3 days before my husband died. He told us to sign the papers or lose everything. He told my son he could keep the house if he cooperated." The stranger's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled. My mother continued, "I signed because I was afraid. My husband refused. The next day he collapsed. I do not know if it was the stress or something else, but after that night, he never spoke again." My brother's voice broke through the tension. "Stop lying," he shouted. "You wanted this. You said we needed it." My mother turned toward him, tears falling. "I said we needed peace. You turned it into profit." The judge called for order again. I sat motionless, my pulse pounding. Years of silence, deceit, and pain, all boiling into one room, one moment. When calm returned, the judge issued her statement. "The evidence suggests coordinated fraud involving multiple parties. This court refers the matter to criminal investigation while maintaining the injunction. The estate remains under temporary guardianship pending resolution." It was not over, but it was enough. As the gavel struck, the stranger rose without emotion. He glanced at my brother, then at me. "You have no idea what you started," he said quietly as he passed. I met his gaze. "Neither did you." He left the courtroom, his footsteps echoing like a warning. Outside, reporters swarmed again, microphones thrust forward, flashes blinding. I said nothing. I walked down the steps into the rain, the sound washing over me like static. My clothes clung to my skin, my heart still thudding. I reached the corner and stopped under the awning of a bakery. Through the glass, I saw people laughing, sharing pastries, living lives untouched by betrayal. For a moment, I envied them. Then I realized envy was a waste. I had crossed too many lines to look back now. The phone buzzed again. Unknown number. The message read, "You think the court protects you. Wait until you see how deep this goes." I stared at it for a long time, then deleted it. Fear had lost its power. They could threaten me, follow me, even ruin me financially. But they could not erase the truth anymore. The recordings were public record now. The evidence had legs of its own. As I walked home through the rain, I thought about my father, about his steady hands, and the way he taught me to hold a pen as if words mattered. He once told me, "The easiest lie to believe is the one spoken by family." He had been right. But now that lie was broken. The storm above thickened, thunder rolling across the city. I did not run. I let it drench me. The war was no longer about inheritance. It was about integrity, legacy, and survival. And I was just getting started. The criminal hearing was set for a Thursday morning, but by Monday, the city already buzzed with it. Every newspaper headline carried fragments of our story. Family feud turns legal inferno. Inheritance scandal deepens. New evidence in forged will case. I had wanted justice. Instead, I had summoned a circus. My lawyer warned me not to look at the news. "It will only feed your fear," he said. "But curiosity is hunger that reason cannot silence." I read every word. Each headline bent the truth a little more until the narrative painted us all as villains in different costumes. My father, the naive patriarch. My mother, the broken accomplice. My brother, the greedy heir. Me, the vengeful outcast. The truth had become entertainment. The courthouse that Thursday overflowed. Reporters, curious onlookers, even law students packed the gallery. The judge entered with the same controlled calm as before, but I could see fatigue in her eyes. The clerk called the case. My brother entered first, in handcuffs. I did not feel triumph. I felt emptiness. The man who once shared my childhood secrets now stood accused of destroying our father's name. Behind him came the stranger, unrestrained, confident, his suit pressed, his smirk polished. He had hired a new lawyer, one with a reputation for making guilt look like confusion. The judge opened with a warning. "This court will not tolerate spectacle. We are here for truth, not performance." The prosecution began with the recordings. My father's voice filled the room again, fragile but undeniable. The defense objected to their authenticity. The judge overruled. Then the prosecutor presented the financial trail, transfers, hidden accounts, offshore holdings, all roads leading to my brother and the stranger's company. The lawyer for the defense countered swiftly. "My client was misled," he said, gesturing to my brother. He trusted the deceased's business associate to manage affairs properly. He had no intent to deceive. My brother's eyes darted toward me, pleading. For a moment, I almost believed him. Old instincts stirred, the urge to forgive, to save. But then I remembered my father's trembling voice saying, "They used my hand." The prosecutor called my mother to the stand again. She looked fragile, clutching a tissue in both hands. The judge reminded her she was under oath. The prosecutor asked, "Did your son know the documents were false?" She nodded slowly. "Yes." "How do you know that?" "Because he told me after it was done." "What did he say?" She looked down, whispering. "He said he was dying anyway." "What difference does it make?" Gasps filled the courtroom. My brother closed his eyes, pressing his lips together. The judge demanded silence. The prosecutor pressed further. "Mrs., did you know the man sitting behind your son?" "Yes." "Did he ever threaten you, or your husband?" "Yes." "What did he say?" Her voice cracked. "He said the debt must be repaid in blood or land." I thought he was being cruel. I did not think he meant it literally. The room fell still. The judge ordered security to escort the stranger outside for questioning. He rose slowly, smiling as he passed my mother. "Careful with your words," he murmured, loud enough for everyone to hear. The bailiff placed a hand on his shoulder and guided him out. For the first time, fear crossed his face. Not deep fear, but the kind that flickers when control slips. The hearing paused for recess. I remained seated, watching my brother. He stared ahead, unblinking, as if his body had gone hollow. When he finally turned toward me, his expression was unreadable. "You think this makes you clean?" he whispered. "No," I said. "Just honest. You destroyed everything. You did that yourself." He leaned closer, voice trembling. "You think she told the truth because of you?" "She told it because he made her. You do not even know half of it." "Then tell me," I said. But he smiled instead, sad, almost nostalgic. "You were always father's favorite. You never understood how it felt to live in your shadow." Before I could reply, the bailiff called us back. The second half of the session spiraled into chaos. The prosecutor revealed that the stranger's company had ties to multiple fraudulent estates across the country. Each case followed the same pattern: terminal illness, forged transfers, sudden deaths. My stomach tightened as I realized we had never been unique. We had just been next. My brother's lawyer tried to pivot the blame entirely onto the stranger, claiming coercion. The stranger's lawyer, equally ruthless, accused my brother of acting independently. It was like watching two predators devour each other while pretending to defend themselves. The judge's patience thinned. "Enough," she snapped. "This court will not serve as a stage for deceit." Then, without warning, the door burst open. A young court officer entered holding a folder. "Your Honor, we received a statement from the forensic accountant assigned last week. It contains new evidence." The judge took the folder and scanned the pages quickly. "This confirms that an additional signature stamp was used on at least 4 documents. The device was registered under your brother's name, Mr." The courtroom erupted again. My brother buried his face in his hands. The stranger looked genuinely surprised for the first time. He had not known about the stamp. The prosecutor pounced. So while the accused may have been manipulated, he was also a willing participant. My lawyer leaned toward me. "This changes everything. The stranger cannot claim full control anymore. Your brother will have to choose between saving himself or saving him." The judge ordered both defense teams to prepare closing arguments for the next day. As the session ended, my brother stood slowly, his cuffs clinking. He turned to me, eyes hollow. "You think you won," he said. "But there is no winning here." I wanted to answer, but the guard led him away before I could. Outside, rain started again, heavier than before. My lawyer walked beside me in silence. When we reached the steps, he said, "They will offer a plea deal. He will take it. And the stranger? He will not. He is the kind of man who believes he can buy gravity." That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by silence. The phone buzzed, unknown number again. I hesitated, then answered. A woman's voice whispered, "They will try to move him before morning. Do not let them." "Who is this?" "I cannot say. But if he disappears, the case dies with him." The line went dead. I called my lawyer immediately. "They are planning to move the stranger," I said. He sighed. "Then we file for immediate custody transfer to the federal unit. They cannot move him without notice if the request is logged." He drafted it within an hour. I signed it electronically. The request went through minutes before midnight. The next morning, news broke. The stranger's car had been found wrecked on the highway. No passengers, no body, just a burnt briefcase in the back seat. The headline screamed, "Prime suspect missing in estate fraud case." The judge issued a warrant. The investigation widened. My brother, realizing the empire had crumbled, finally broke. He confessed that the stranger had promised to cancel the debts and give him a share of every future property deal. He admitted to forging signatures, bribing the notary, and hiding money through shell accounts. He said my mother had begged him to stop, but by then it was too late. When the confession ended, the judge looked at me. "Do you have anything to say before I close today's record?" I stood, voice steady. "I only want the truth remembered in my father's name. Not for money, for peace." The gavel came down. It sounded like an ending, but it was not. Endings require closure. This was only silence after the storm, a pause before the reckoning that still waited beyond the walls of that courtroom. I did not sleep after the confession. The city hummed outside my window while every thought in my head moved like glass across stone. My brother had admitted to the forgeries. The stranger had vanished. The court had placed the estate under my care for the moment, yet nothing felt safe. I kept thinking about my father's last days, the way his words fell thin and careful in the recordings, as if he knew language itself could be stolen. Before sunrise, the nurse who had appeared in the video called me from a private number. Her voice sounded strained, like someone whispering in a church. She said she had remembered something that had bothered her for months, but had never made sense until now. She asked me to meet her outside the back entrance of the hospital, near the loading bay where ambulances idle before dawn. I went without telling anyone. The air smelled like rain and metal. She stood under a flickering lamp, hands in her coat pockets, eyes moving fast. She did not waste time. She told me a pharmacist had logged an unusual override during my father's final night. A newer batch number had been swapped for an older one, same medication label, different effects at high dosage. She had flagged it at the time, but the system showed a doctor's approval code. She had no reason to push further. Only later did she notice that the code belonged to a physician who had already signed out for the night. I felt cold spread through me. I asked her if she was sure. She nodded and handed me a folded printout with timestamps. She told me the hospital would deny everything if asked, so I should move carefully. She said one last thing before leaving. A man she did not recognize had visited the nurse station that night, claiming to be a family representative. He left after asking too many questions about dosages and discharge times. His name matched the stranger's assistant. I walked home with that paper burning in my pocket. The streets looked ordinary, but every shadow felt like a witness. When I reached the apartment, I called the old lawyer and read the sheet to him line by line. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said the quietest sentence I had heard since this began. He said we might be looking at more than fraud. The word hung there, heavy and simple. I did not repeat it. I did not need to. I told him I would bring the printout. He told me to guard it like blood. The next hour blurred into logistics. We drafted an emergency motion to expand the case into a full inquiry on medical interference. We requested the hospital's medication logs, the camera footage from the corridor, the sign-in ledger for visitors after hours, and the record of every key card used within that wing. The clerk stamped the motion and gave us a hearing slot that afternoon. I left the courthouse with the paper warming my hand and dread warming my chest. On the way out, I saw my mother sitting alone on a bench under the courthouse steps, her scarf loose, her eyes swollen. She looked at me the way people look at a shoreline after a storm. She asked if the stranger would return. I told her I did not know. She asked if I would push this further. I said yes. She stared at the ground and whispered that there was one detail she had never told me. I leaned closer. She said that 2 nights before my father's collapse, the stranger had called the house and asked my brother to bring our father home early from the hospital the next day. He had insisted that the discharge would be simple and that he had arranged a private nurse. My father refused to leave that soon. He argued with my brother for an hour. He had said he did not trust anyone in the house at night. My mother went quiet at that point, as if the memory itself had edges. She said my brother stormed out with a slammed door and did not return until morning. I asked where the private nurse came from. She said no one ever showed up. She said all of it felt like a rehearsal for something worse. She stood then, almost as if standing could keep her from unraveling. She told me she wanted to testify again. I did not know whether to hold her or hold my distance. I chose distance. I told her the court would call when needed. She nodded and left, small against the stone steps. At the afternoon hearing, the judge read our motion and looked directly at the hospital counsel. The hospital's lawyer stood, all polished calm, and said their systems were secure, their staff honest, and their logs complete. My lawyer handed the judge the override printout. The judge raised an eyebrow and asked the hospital counsel why a signed-out physician's code appeared on a midnight change. The lawyer faltered, said he would need to consult records. The judge gave him 24 hours. She granted our request to preserve security footage and to seal all logs. She warned that any missing data would be treated as spoliation. When we stepped into the hallway, a man in a delivery uniform brushed past me and dropped a small padded envelope at my feet. He did not wait for a signature. I picked it up. No return address. Inside lay a single key card and a small note that said, "You missed one. No name, just a time and a floor number." The time was tonight. The floor matched the hospital wing from my father's last night. I took the card straight to my lawyer. He went pale. He said this felt like a trap and an opportunity at the same time. We had already secured a preservation order. Entering the hospital without notice could be risky. Waiting could mean the trail goes black. I said I would not go alone. He said I should not go at all. I went anyway, but I brought a friend who had nothing to do with the case and everything to do with keeping eyes open. I texted the clerk the moment we left, dropping a timestamp into the record. The hospital corridor smelled like disinfectant and silence. We moved at a steady pace, not too fast, not too slow. The key card blinked green at a locked door near the end of the hall. Inside, a small records room sat with cabinets along each wall and a single camera pointing at a blind angle that left the center dark. I took one step in and stopped. My friend stayed at the door, eyes on the hall. The filing system was alphabetical but misaligned in a way that felt intentional. I went to the drawer for my father's wing and found a folder with his name spelled correctly on the tab, but wrong on the form inside. One letter replaced with a close twin. A false folder. A decoy. Beneath it, shoved into the back, I found a second folder with the original spelling. It held a printout of the medication orders and a second sheet with handwritten changes. The handwriting did not belong to the attending physician. It belonged to a covering doctor who never appeared on any official schedules. The signature was a rubber stamp impression. I took photos with my phone. The pages showed the dosage change at midnight and a new notation scratched in hurried pen. Family rep approved. No name, no code, just that line. A sound in the hall froze me. Footsteps. Not the soft roll of a nurse's shoes, but heavy soles moving without hurry. I slid the folder back into place and locked the drawer. My friend tugged my sleeve. We stepped out and walked the opposite way as if we had lost our way. A man in a maintenance jacket walked past without looking at us. His jacket logo matched a contractor I had seen on the Strangers building months ago. He turned the corner and disappeared. I did not breathe until the elevator doors closed. I sent the photos to my lawyer and to my own cloud with 2 different email addresses. I sent them to the clerk with the case number in the subject line. Then I turned off the phone and watched the floor numbers blink down to the lobby. My friend asked if I would be safe. I said no. Safety had left the story the day I sat in that first room and heard my name go missing from the will. By morning, the judge had the photos. The hospital brought a new lawyer who promised full cooperation. The old lawyer did not return. The judge ordered the arrest of the covering doctor whose name appeared on the stamp. A warrant went out for the stranger's assistant. The police searched the notary's office again and found a second stamp hidden in a ceiling panel. In the afternoon, a courier arrived at my door with a small box wrapped in brown paper. No sender. Inside lay my father's pen, the heavy black one he used for contracts. The cap carried a tiny camera. A note beneath it read, "He planned for them. He planned for you." Check the clip dated 2 nights before he fell. The handwriting looked familiar. It looked like my mother's, steadier now, as if fear had retreated just enough to let truth walk. I charged the pen and waited. When the file opened, my father's study appeared in perfect angle. The stranger stood by the window, back to the camera. My brother sat across from the desk, jaw tight, eyes glassy with stubborn pride and fear. My father's voice came from the corner of the room, firm in a way I had not heard in months. He told them he would not sign. He told the stranger to leave. The stranger walked closer to the desk and placed a small white envelope on the blotter. My brother looked at it with a hunger that broke my heart. My father pushed it back. The stranger said a sentence that made my skin go cold. He said, "Then the night will help you decide." The clip ended there. No sound after it. Just a still frame of the envelope sitting on wood like a pale promise. I copied the clip to 3 drives and carried one to the courthouse myself. I did not take a taxi. I walked. Every step felt like a bead of proof. When the clerk logged the file, I saw my signature on the receipt and felt a sudden calm settle over me. I had moved past anger into something sharper. I had moved into duty. Night fell again. The city breathed its usual noise. A message arrived from an unknown number with 5 words that felt like a key turning inside a locked door. It said, "He is not the only one." I read it twice. I looked out the window at the dark line of the hospital wing against the sky. I thought about the rubber stamp, the fake folder, the pharmacist override, the assistant walking halls he had no right to enter, and the envelope on my father's desk. There was a second hand in the room that night, not just the stranger. A hand that had moved through our home for years and called itself family. I put the phone down and turned off the light. I understood what the message meant. The truth would not end with the stranger. The truth would walk back into our house and look at me with eyes I had known since childhood. And I would have to face it without blinking. The message sat on my screen like a whisper with teeth. He is not the only one. I stared at those words until the room felt thinner. I thought about every hand that had moved through our house without knocking. The assistant in the corridor, the covering doctor with a stamped signature, the notary with a sealing panel full of secrets, and the person who knew our locks, our habits, our blind spots. Morning arrived with a call from the prosecutor. The hospital had surrendered a partial camera roll. The crucial corridor footage was intact, but the feed from the pharmacy wing showed a 5-minute blackout at midnight. The nurse's override printout sat in our file like a pulse. The judge scheduled an emergency session. We had momentum, but momentum without caution breaks bones. I reached the courthouse with the pen drive tucked inside my jacket. The judge watched the clip from my father's study twice. She noted the envelope. She noted the sentence. She turned to the hospital counsel and asked a simple question: who logged visitor access 2 nights before the collapse? The counsel shuffled papers, then said a name I had not expected. He said my aunt's pass had opened a side entrance at 9:12 p.m., recorded as family access for special care visit. He said she signed for a visitor badge at the nurse station and returned it at 11:47 p.m. The word aunt slid through me like cold water. I heard my father's voice again in the recording, thin and steady, warning that paper could vanish. I watched my aunt in my memory, smiling while pouring tea, telling old family stories in the same living room where my father had refused to sign. She had always been near my brother, urging him to take more, telling him that ambition was duty. I had dismissed it as talk. I had treated it like wind. The prosecutor moved quickly. A subpoena landed on my aunt before noon. She arrived in court in a jade shawl, chin high, eyes sharp. She swore the oath with the calm of a person who believed the ground would never shift under her feet. The judge asked if she had visited the hospital. She said yes. She claimed she had brought soup. She claimed she had sat by my mother's side. She claimed she had left early. The prosecutor showed the log timings. The hours stretched longer than soup and comfort. He asked who she met in those hours. She said she did not remember. The judge asked again, slower. Silence pooled. Then the prosecutor showed the stills from the corridor. My aunt walking with a man in a maintenance jacket. They did not walk like family. They walked like people who knew the cameras were mounted above shoulder height. Heads tilted down, hands in pockets, stride tight. The judge asked who the man was. My aunt looked at me for the first time and said he was no one. The judge asked the bailiff to escort my aunt to the side room for a short recess. The air in the courtroom thickened until breathing felt like work. My brother stared at the table. I could not tell if he knew. He had always believed he ran the stage. Now the curtains hung in someone else's hands. When the session resumed, the prosecutor held new papers. Bank transfers. Small, regular payments from a shell account tied to the notary to an account in my aunt's name. The dates lined up with each major document move in our case. The prosecutor asked if she had ever received money from the notary. She said the account was a gift from a friend. The judge leaned forward and asked for the friend's name. My aunt paused, then gave a name that linked to Argus Capital through a second shell. A web, not a line. The judge ordered her phone seized. She ruled that my aunt would remain under a limited custody order, barred from contact with anyone tied to the case. As the bailiff approached, my aunt turned toward me with eyes full of something I could not name. It was not remorse. It was not fear. It was an old wound, raw and jealous, finally showing its face. I heard her whisper, not loud enough for the recorder, but clear enough for me. You always had his softness. You never learned the hard part. The hearing moved on. The hospital's covering doctor was placed under arrest at his clinic across town. The notary was charged with falsifying records. The assistant was still missing. The stranger roamed like a shadow with a phone and a network. The judge froze every asset that touched our surname until the criminal case finished. She said the estate would remain under my guardianship unless new evidence proved I had touched the fraud. The opposing tables stayed silent. They had nothing left to throw that did not land on their own feet. In the hallway, my mother approached like a tide with nowhere else to go. She told me the pen had been hidden in the back of a drawer that my aunt kept locked. She said she had found it by accident while searching for old family photos to give the court. She had watched the clip and cried until her scarf was wet. She said my aunt had always wanted control, long before the stranger arrived, long before my brother's pride learned to eat. I asked why she had said nothing earlier. She looked down at her hands. Because I did not know how to stop her without losing both of you. We sat on a bench for a minute that felt like a year. I asked her if she would testify again, this time about the drawer and the key and the pen. She nodded. Her voice turned steady. The fear had not left her face, but purpose had entered it. The next day, the prosecutor called me in for a deposition. I told the story in clean lines, no flourishes, no guesses, just the spine of what happened. I described the will reading, the accountant's warning, the pawn shop laptop, the nurse's printout, the records room, the rubber stamp, the corridor stills, the pen. I spoke my father's sentence out loud. Blood is not a reason to obey. The court reporter's fingers paused for a breath when I said it. Then the keys resumed, capturing each word like a nail. By afternoon, we stood in front of the judge again. The prosecutor laid out a reply the size of a brick. At the end of it sat a motion that carried an unfamiliar title. It asked the court to unseal a trust document that had been filed years earlier and left dormant by design. The title named the grantor as my father. It named the trustee as his oldest friend, a quiet man who had moved away after a long illness and who had never returned to the city. The court had received the document under private seal the year my brother moved back home. The trust carried one trigger. If evidence of coercion touched the estate, the trust would activate, freeze family control, divert all contested assets into a protective fund, and appoint a temporary steward until the court resolved the crime. The steward, named on page 3, was me. The room went so quiet I could hear my pulse. The judge looked at the seal, at the date, at the signature verified by 2 witnesses who were still alive. She asked the clerk to bring the sealed envelope from records. The clerk returned with a thick packet bound in red thread. The judge broke the seal in front of everyone and read the first page. Then she read the third. Then she closed her eyes for a second, as if listening to a bell only she could hear. She spoke slowly. The trust met all legal tests. The trigger clause matched the present situation. The document granted the steward power to pay debts that were lawful and to reject those that grew from fraud. It granted the steward power to audit the business and to rebuild whatever still could be saved. It granted the steward power to sell nothing until the criminal case ended. It granted the steward power to fund pensions, wages, and medical costs for any employee harmed by this mess. And it carried one more clause that no one expected. If any family member participated in fraud or coercion, their share would be forfeited to a charity named for my father's parents. The court would supervise every transfer. No one could touch a coin without leaving a trace. My brother sagged in his chair. My aunt stared at the floor. My mother covered her face with both hands and shook like a leaf in wind. The stranger was not there to see it. Maybe that was the point. He had walked us to the cliff and left before the rocks fell. He had bought courage with paper and then scattered when paper turned to fire. The judge set the next hearing for the following week. She appointed an independent auditor to work with me. She warned every party that any attempt to hide records now would open doors they would not like. She looked at me last. "You did not ask for this," she said. "You carry it now." I walked out of the courtroom into late sun. The city noise sounded different. Not soft, not kind, honest. I sat on the courthouse steps and read the steward clause again. My father had known exactly who would come for him, and he had known exactly how to answer. He had not saved money. He had saved the spine of what our name stood for. He had taken their plot to cut me out and turned it into a trap they could not see. People passed by carrying paper cups and briefcases, moving through their own storms. My phone buzzed with a single message from an unknown number. It said, "You think this ends with her? Look closer at the night he fell." There was an attachment, a still frame from the hospital camera, zoomed grainy but clear enough. Two figures at the nurse station. My aunt facing the desk. Beside her, half turned, was someone I knew too well. The curve of the shoulder, the tilt of the head. My brother's partner from school days, the one who used to spend weekends at our house, the one who became a doctor and moved away, the one who never came to the funeral. The file name carried a timestamp. 11:59 p.m. I felt the ground tilt again, but I did not lose balance. The path had shifted. The circle had widened. The light had moved to a face I had not thought to question. I stood, folded the trust copy, and put it in my pocket. The next step would cut deeper than money, deeper than titles. The next step would walk into a past I had left kind on purpose. The sun slipped behind the courthouse dome, turning the stone a darker shade. I looked at the door and knew I would be back in the morning with a name I had not spoken in years, a face I had once called friend, and a truth that would not let either of us hide. The photo haunted me all night. I did not open it again, but I saw it each time I closed my eyes. The timestamp, the curve of a familiar shoulder, the way the figure stood beside my aunt at the nurse's desk, body turned away from the camera, half in shadow. My brother's old friend, Dr. Kaleem. The man who had once played cards with us on the veranda, laughing at nothing, pretending he had no edge. I had not thought about him in years. After medical school, he left for another city. When the case first began, I had searched every name connected to the hospital. His had not appeared. Now it stood inside a frame from a security feed taken minutes before my father's last breath. I sat in the dark, the city outside half asleep. The lights through the blinds painted slow stripes across the floor. Somewhere a siren wailed. I felt the cold return, the one that had sat in me the day the will was read. That same calm before impact. I understood now what the last message had meant. The stranger had been a hand. Dr. Kaleem had been another. At dawn, I took the still frame to the prosecutor's office. The assistant district attorney looked at it twice and asked for the source. I told him it came from an anonymous number. He nodded but said nothing. He forwarded it to the digital unit. By noon, they traced the phone that sent it. The signal came from within the hospital itself, from a device logged to the pharmacy's inventory server. That meant someone inside still wanted the truth to surface. The ADA called the judge and requested an emergency review. The judge granted it and demanded the hospital deliver every visitor log, entry badge, and prescription record for that night. She added one more condition. No one from the hospital's board was to alter or remove anything until forensic officers arrived. She used the word tampering 3 times. Everyone understood what it meant. The footage analysis arrived that afternoon. The grainy image sharpened under enhancement. My brother's friend looked older, beard trimmed, hair streaked with gray, but the eyes were the same. The badge around his neck carried a false ID under a temporary pass. He had signed in as Consultant A. The signature on the log matched the covering doctor's handwriting, the same one on the forged dosage sheet. The pieces no longer lay scattered. They aligned. The stranger had money. My aunt had access. My brother had motive. And Dr. Kaleem had execution. When the prosecutor presented this to the judge, she closed her eyes for a long moment, then reopened them. "Issue a warrant," she said. "Arrest him before he vanishes too." The arrest came quicker than anyone expected. The police found him in a clinic near the outskirts, running a private ward under another name. They brought him in at dusk, hands cuffed, expression unreadable. When the news broke, the courthouse filled again. Same crowd, same whispers, new shock. I sat in the gallery when they brought him in. He glanced toward me once. No fear, no anger, only recognition, the kind that passes between people who shared the same childhood street. The judge read the charges. Falsifying medical records, administering unauthorized medication, complicity in coercion, and obstruction of justice. He said nothing. His lawyer asked for time to review evidence. The judge denied bail. The prosecutor then made a request that froze the air. Your Honor, we asked to unseal the autopsy supplement suppressed during the initial hospital inquiry. I felt my pulse rise. The hospital's counsel tried to object, saying the records had already been certified. The judge cut her off. You withheld a doctor's involvement. The supplement stays under lock until we read it here. The clerk retrieved the file. The judge read the first page aloud. It listed the cause of death as cardiac arrest triggered by severe potassium imbalance. The next page contained lab results showing elevated levels inconsistent with the dosage logged. The next contained a handwritten note in the pathologist's file. Family requested expedited cremation. Approved by Dr. Kaleem. The courtroom noise swelled until the judge struck the gavel. Order. I did not move. I did not breathe. The word cremation rolled inside my skull until everything else dulled. My father had wanted burial, not fire. He had written it once in his will before they replaced it. He had said, "When I am gone, let me rest beside your grandfather." I heard my mother sob quietly behind me. The judge turned toward me. Do you wish to make a statement for the record? I stood, not trusting my voice, but using it anyway. He feared this, I said. He recorded it because he knew this would come. They took everything from him, and when that was not enough, they took the piece of his ending. The judge nodded once. It is on record. The hearing ended in chaos. Reporters flooded the steps. Questions flew like stones. Did you know him? Why did your family hide this? Was it murder? I said nothing. The prosecutor shielded me as best he could, but by evening my face was on every news channel. My phone rang nonstop with messages from strangers, some sympathetic, some cruel, all intrusive. The story had gone public in a way I had not intended. The network. Anchors spoke of corruption, greed, and justice. They used words like conspiracy and poisoning. They called my father the businessman betrayed by his own blood. At home, I turned off every light and sat in the dark again. The quiet did not comfort me anymore. It felt like pressure. My mother called from a safe house arranged by the prosecutor. She said the news had reached relatives abroad. She said she could not bear the shame. I told her shame belonged to those who acted, not to those who exposed it. She said she was proud of me, then hung up before her voice broke. The next day, new evidence arrived, another recording from the pen camera. This one dated a week earlier. It captured a conversation between my father and Dr. Kaleem. They spoke calmly, almost cordially. My father asked if the treatments were necessary. Kaleem assured him they were. Then my father asked something that made my chest tighten. Will they stop if I stop paying? Kaleem hesitated, then said, You should rest, sir. That pause, that evasion, it said more than any confession. The prosecutor played the recording in court the next morning. The defense tried to argue entrapment, but the judge had heard enough. She ruled that the estate would proceed under criminal protection until every party responsible for coercion faced trial. She ordered the immediate seizure of Argus Capital's local assets and the freezing of every related account. When the gavel struck, I felt the floor steady for the first time in months. Outside the courthouse, the air smelled of rain again. Reporters called after me, but I kept walking. My brother's lawyer caught up, breathless, holding an envelope. He wanted you to have this, he said. Inside was a short letter in my brother's handwriting. I thought I was saving us. I was wrong. Tell her I am sorry. No signature, no date. Just that. I folded it and put it in my pocket. Forgiveness would not come quickly, but maybe one day it would come at all. At home, I placed the letter beside my father's pen. I looked at them both, the tool that revealed the truth and the apology that arrived too late. They were made of the same material, metal and ink. One cut through lies. The other tried to mend them. The next morning, the prosecutor called with one last update. The stranger had been found. Not dead, not hiding. He had turned himself in. His first words during interrogation were, "It was never supposed to go that far." The circle had closed, but closure still felt distant. The law would finish what emotion could not. My father's name would stand clean again. The family's plan to erase me had erased itself instead. As I left the courthouse for what I hoped was the last time, the clouds broke just enough for sunlight to touch the steps. The marble gleamed wet and sharp, like truth pulled from mud. I thought of my father's voice on those recordings, tired, patient, brave. I whispered into the wind, I kept your word. They cannot bury it again. And for the first time, I believed it. The house looked smaller when I walked through the gate with the steward papers in my pocket. The garden had gone wild during all those weeks in court. Vines climbed the wall, leaves pressed against glass. A worker from the old staff stood near the porch, cap in hand, eyes uncertain. I told him the wages would be paid on time and that the pension fund would be restored first. He nodded without speaking, as if sound might break what little was left of our home. Inside, the living room still carried the smell of dust and old tea. My mother sat on the edge of the couch with a shawl around her shoulders, waiting like someone who had missed a train and had nowhere else to go. She stood when she saw me, then sat again. She asked if there was any way to keep my brother out of prison. I said that choice now rested with the court and his own honesty. She closed her eyes, pressing the bridge of her nose with 2 fingers the way she used to do when I was a child, and refused to sleep. I told her about the trust clauses that protected workers, the rule that barred any sale, the audit that would begin at dawn. She listened in silence. When I finished, she whispered that my father had written that trust the same week my brother moved home. He had seen the tide and built a wall with paper because walls of stone would have drawn suspicion. She said he named me steward long before any fight because steadiness is a habit, not a gift. I could not speak after that. I touched the pen in my pocket and let the wait answer for me. By afternoon, the auditor arrived with 2 assistants. We moved room to room, drawer to drawer. In my father's study, the ledgers told a calm story of a business that had survived storms until a hand twisted its lifeline. The auditor photographed every page and logged each box with a red tag. The shelves felt lighter with each item that left the room under seal. I felt lighter too, the way a body feels after a fever breaks. The doorbell rang near sunset. My aunt stood on the step with a fixed smile and a lawyer beside her. She asked to retrieve personal items. I said nothing about the smile that had once warmed rooms and now chilled them. The auditor explained the custody order and the rule against entering without permission. My aunt lowered her voice and asked for 5 minutes alone. I told her that time had ended the moment she walked the corridor with a stranger in a borrowed night. She looked past me into the study and said the line that had always hidden under her kindness. She said I had been born soft and had turned that softness into a throne. She said the house deserved someone who knew how to keep doors closed. I told her doors do not belong to the person who slams them the loudest. The lawyer whispered in her ear, and she left without looking back. The shawl brushed the gate like a curtain closing on a bad play. That night the prosecutor called. Dr. Kaleem had offered a statement. He admitted the alteration of dosage, the false log, the signature stamp. He said he had believed the patient would not survive a month, and that the plan would move money into safe hands before debt swallowed the business. He spoke like a man reading a menu he had memorized too well. Near the end, he said a quiet sentence that hooked the breath in my throat. He said the final override had not been his. He said someone else had reached for the console while he argued with a nurse about discharge forms. He would not give a name. He only said the hands were small and sure. I stared at the wall long after the call ended. Small hands. Sure hands. My aunt's hands were thin, but they shook when she lied. My mother's hands were careful, but not quick. I saw another set in my mind. Younger, steadier, untroubled by rules. My brother's partner had trained under Dr. Kaleem before moving away. He used to visit on weekends and fix radios on the dining table, tiny screws between his fingers like seeds. The still frame from the hospital showed his shoulder in profile and a strand of hair that had slipped from its neat part. Memory and evidence leaned toward the same door. Morning brought a meeting with the judge and chambers. The prosecutor requested expanded protection for my mother under witness rules. The judge approved and added a note that any attempt to contact her outside counsel would trigger contempt. Then the judge turned to me and asked about the business. I said the first payroll was ready. I said the supplier contracts needed clean rewrites. I said the pension backlog would be cleared within a week if the freeze on legitimate accounts lifted under supervision. She signed the orders and told me to hire a new accountant before nightfall. I left with a folder that weighed less than a promise and more than a threat. On the steps, my brother waited with a guard at his shoulder. He had the look of someone who had run out of lies and found only silence left. He asked for a minute, and the guard allowed it at a distance. He said he would plead to the charges if the court spared our mother from another hearing. I told him that path did not run through me. He nodded and said he had written a full statement. He said there was one thing left that only I should hear. He told me the envelope on the desk in the pen video held not cash, but a list of businesses already marked for the same scheme. He had seen names we knew from family gatherings and school reunions. He had seen signatures that matched doctors from other wards. He said Argus did not invent greed, it only hired it. He looked down at his hands then, and I realized they were the hands of a child who had taken something and broken it by accident. Only this time the accident had learned to breathe. I asked him why he had not walked away when the first lie worked. He said the first line never works by itself. It drags a second and a third behind it like anchors that pretend to be wheels. He asked me if I would visit him after sentencing. I said I would try. The guard touched his shoulder. He turned once more and said to tell our mother that he had failed at everything that mattered, and that he hoped failure might grow into humility, the way fire sometimes grows into light. The trial moved into its last week with a speed that felt unreal after months of grinding steps. The stranger traded names for leniency. My aunt faced charges that could empty her accounts and compress her freedom to a set of gray walls. The covering doctor lost his license and his stone face alike. The notary cried when the hidden stamp was unwrapped on a courtroom table. Each confession felt like a door opening to a room I had known was there, but could not prove. Each admission lifted weight from my father's shadow. During closing arguments, my lawyer spoke without heat. He said the case had never been about a house or a balance sheet. He said it had been about choice at every fork. A choice to sign or to refuse. A choice to walk a corridor at midnight or to stay home with the truth. A choice to listen to a dying man's voice or to drown it under paper. He asked the court to remember those choices when it wrote the record. He sat down and did not look at me because he knew if he did, we would both break. The judge read the findings 2 days later. The forgery stood proven. The medical interference stood proven. The conspiracy stood proven. The estate entered protective stewardship until appeals ended. The workers' pensions would be paid before any family distribution. The charity named for my grandparents would inherit the shares of those who took part in fraud. The recordings were archived with a permanent note that said the deceased had tried to speak and had been heard at last. When the gavel dropped, the room did not erupt. People just breathed, as if oxygen had returned after a fire. My mother cried without sound and pressed her forehead to my shoulder. My aunt stared at her shoes. My brother stood without resistance when the guard touched his arm. He did not look at me. He looked at the judge and whispered thank you, as if gratitude could be born in a place like this. Outside, the sky shifted from steel to pale blue. The city noise rose around the courthouse like a tide that had been waiting for the gate to open. I walked to the park and sat on the bench where my father used to fold his newspaper after finishing the last page. The trust papers rested beside me. The pen lay in my palm. The weight felt right now, not like a burden, but like a tool that knows its work. I thought about the title of this story and how it had sounded like anger when I whispered it to myself at the start. The family's plan had been simple. Cut me out, close the door, erase the signature that tied me to this place. They had not expected him to foresee them. They had not expected me to learn their patience. They had not expected the law to listen. Their plan had backfired, not like a spark, but like a long fuse that burned all the way back to the hand that lit it. Evening fell, and a worker from the factory called to ask if wages would clear at midnight. I said yes. He asked if he should tell the others it was safe to hope again. I said hope is not safe, but it is stubborn, and sometimes that is enough. I stood, slid the pen into my pocket, and started back toward the house with the vines on the wall. There would be more hearings and more audits and more nights when sleep stayed away. There would be anger that did not know where to land. There would be days when forgiveness felt like a code I could not read. Yet the path was straight now. The lies had stopped rearranging the furniture of my mind. At the gate, I looked at the windows of the study and saw my reflection in the glass. I said out loud that I would keep going until the last account balanced, and the last worker got paid, and the last page of the record carried his true name. The night did not answer. It did not need to. I already knew what came next. After the last verdict, I expected silence to feel like victory. It did not. It felt like a new kind of echo. Empty halls where every sound reminded me of what used to live there. The estate was mine to manage, the case now a matter of paperwork and audits. Yet when I woke each morning, the first thought that came was not triumph but exhaustion. The newspapers had moved on to other stories. The reporters stopped calling. The city forgot faster than I imagined. Justice fades from headlines the moment it stops being profitable. What remained was life, raw, ordinary, waiting to be rebuilt. I spent my days in my father's office, cataloging files that no longer carried danger. I paid back wages, reopened supplier accounts, restored the scholarship fund he once started for factory children. Each small act steadied my breathing. The workers came back slowly. Some brought flowers, some brought silence. They did not look at me as a savior. They looked at me as someone who had stayed when everyone else ran. That was enough. My mother moved to a smaller house near the coast. She wanted quiet, she said, something without walls that listened. We spoke often, but carefully. I never asked if she regretted her silence. She never asked if I forgave her. Forgiveness is not a sentence. It is a process. Like the tide, it leaves salt behind each time it returns. My brother's trial ended with a reduced sentence for cooperation. I visited him once before he was moved. The prison smelled of disinfectant and heat. He looked older, thinner. We sat across from each other separated by glass. He asked if I hated him. I said no. Hate had burned out long before the verdict. What remained was distance, clean and unsharpened. He nodded, and for a second, I saw the brother I used to chase across the garden as a child. Before ambition, before fear. He smiled weakly. Maybe we learned too late that being right and being kind are not the same thing. I said nothing, but the words stayed with me. That night, I dreamed of my father for the first time since the trial. He was sitting at the old bench under the tree, the newspaper folded on his lap. He looked at me and said nothing. Then he smiled, that quiet kind of smile that carried both approval and warning. I woke before dawn, the room filled with pale light, and for the first time in months, my chest did not hurt. Healing did not arrive like sunlight. It arrived like rain, slow, steady, patient. I stopped expecting closure and started allowing peace. The house no longer felt haunted. The study no longer carried tension. The vines outside bloomed again. I let them grow. One afternoon, I opened a drawer I had avoided since the trial and found a stack of my father's old notebooks. In the margins of one, he had written a line I had never seen before. If truth costs you everything, pay it. What you buy with it will outlast you. I copied that line on the first page of a new ledger. I decided the business would fund a foundation in his name. Not just charity, but a place for people trapped in family disputes, people who could not afford the kind of war I had survived. The first case arrived 2 months later, a widow whose sons had frozen her accounts. She sat in my office, trembling the same way I once had. When she left, holding papers that would protect her property, I realized redemption was not something I waited for. It was something I built. Each night, I wrote down one thing I was grateful for. At first, the list was small: silence, sleep, air. Then it grew: letters from workers' families, the sound of waves near my mother's house, the knowledge that my father's pen had done more than write. It had spoken when no one else dared. The pain did not vanish. It simply learned to live beside peace. That was healing enough. Time moved differently after justice. It did not heal all wounds, but it balanced them. Years later, the factory thrived again under transparent management. The charity for my grandparents fed hundreds of children each year. My father's name became a symbol of integrity in trade journals that once printed rumors of scandal. And the stranger, the man who thought he could buy gravity, spent the rest of his life answering questions from auditors who never stopped digging. The world forgot the details, but the law did not. Every time a new firm tried to recreate the same network, my father's case appeared in legal training manuals as a warning. His voice had become part of the system he once believed in. That, I thought, was real immortality. My aunt lost her properties under forfeiture. She wrote one letter from confinement, a strange mix of confession and defense. She said greed had never been her sin, envy had. She said she envied my father for being loved and me for being chosen. I read the letter once and filed it under documents to archive. She died a year later, quietly, without ceremony. My brother served his time and was released on probation. He found work at a small repair shop in another city. Sometimes he called on holidays. We spoke about small things: the weather, our mother's health, the business. He never mentioned the past directly, but his pauses spoke louder than apology. I learned that redemption does not always need words. Sometimes it is enough to live differently. I visited my mother every month. She grew calmer with age, her eyes lighter, her voice clearer. One evening, while watching the sunset, she said she had written something for me. It was a single page, a list of names. Every person who had helped us without asking for credit. The nurse who brought the printout. The clerk who filed the injunction. The accountant who risked his job to leak information. She said gratitude keeps history clean. I kept that page in the trust vault beside my father's pen. When the estate's final audit closed, the judge invited me to her chambers for the last signature. She said she still remembered the first day, the will reading, the tension, the silence. She said cases like mine reminded her why law mattered. Before I left, she asked if I had found peace. I said peace is not a place, it is a direction. She smiled. Then keep walking that way. That night, I walked through the city. The lights reflected on wet pavement, the same. Streets that once carried my fear, now carrying strangers' laughter. I passed the courthouse steps where I had once trembled with evidence in my pocket. A young couple sat there, arguing softly, holding each other's hands. Life had replaced drama with rhythm. The world had moved on, and I was grateful for it. I ended my walk at the park. The same bench. The same tree. The vines around it had thickened, twisting upward, reaching higher each year. I sat there with my father's pen in hand, now empty of ink, but full of memory. I whispered, "You were right. Truth costs everything, but it pays for freedom." The wind moved through the leaves like applause. In that quiet, I realized poetic justice does not arrive with thunder or headlines. It arrives quietly, in the continuation of decency. The family that tried to erase me had erased themselves from memory. Their wealth turned into restitution. Their lies turned into lessons taught in classrooms. Their betrayal had fed the very truth they feared. That was the poem the world had written for them. I took one last look at the tree before leaving. Its roots had cracked the concrete path, but the city gardeners had left it untouched. They said the roots were too deep to move. That was how I saw my father's legacy. Cracked, stubborn, but impossible to uproot. When I reached home, I opened a new ledger for the foundation. On the first page, I wrote the words that had carried me through every storm. They thought they had cut me out of everything, but all they did was carve the path that led me here. And under it, I added a line of my own. Sometimes justice does not roar, it whispers. And in that whisper, the world remembers your name.